Guy has said he's going to be 5 minutes late, as ever. I have apologies from Jeff. I haven't heard from Gary, so don't know what's going on there. And we've assumed that Steve's sending apologies. So let us. Yeah.
It's fine. I'm used to it. I'm still.
Ellie around there.
Oh, was Ellie coming?
I think so. Was she?
Well, she's not here.
No, is she joining on the?
I thought she was subbing for Steve as well.
Yes,
I
I
apologise.
Okay.
Okay. Mayor.
Well, we'll not wait because we are for it. I will start the meeting. So welcome everyone to another exciting edition of Committee Model Working Group. There isn't going to be a fire alarm test, so if it does go off, then please assemble by the cathedral. Yeah, that's the apologies. Guys coming late, don't know where Gary is. Possibly a substitution from Ellie, and we're one Conservative down, Jeff. Declarations of interest. Any? Don't suppose so. Minutes from the last meeting and decisions. Does anyone have any comments on those? Nope. So they're agreed. Right. Public forum. Let's. Page unavailable. Hello. There's been a bit of a hurrah with the public forum, unfortunately, today because. Oh no, I just reloaded it. It's fine. Oh no, but that was the main thing. Oh no, it's come. Yeah, no, it's fine.
Sorry, I did have to take it down and republish it
We had
very
to-
last second.
We had to take one statement out because the member of the public requested that it come out. Right, so we've got, start off with some questions from Dan.
So yeah, I just have one follow-up question
To which ones?
to question one.
Okay.
To be honest, I didn't actually fully understand the answer that was given. The answer says that legal advice is given to members about who can vote on matters in a meeting as soon as it can be. But I've observed a couple of meetings where somebody suggested that a member shouldn't be allowed to vote for various reasons during the meeting, which certainly came as a very big surprise to that member. So I guess just repeat the question of that we don't seem to have very clear rules about what's going to happen if one member thinks another member shouldn't be taking part in the vote for whatever reason.
So I suppose the initial answer is that in theory it oughtn't be any different from how things currently function. So we basically identified a potential dysfunctionality that would exist in whatever system. It's definitely the case that we do receive this information. Whether people are happy about it or not, and the extent to which there are arguments about it, for example, things like if you're a renter you can't vote on a school council motion. There's normally discussions with whips, so it is communicated to groups as soon as possible. I think you're probably referring to things that I don't know about and haven't experienced. So if there's any particular one, maybe, or maybe, yeah, if you could say something that maybe someone else could answer before you would be there, or I don't know. Has anyone had this happen to them?
I was there in the audience for DCA, and I think it was when there was an issue as to whether a member who hadn't originally been on the previous decision planning group was allowed to vote. It was to do with that. And then there was
because they have
if I could add.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
that's right.
It was specific because one member who was subbing, Councillor Beckles, actually asked whether he should participate, and although clearly there's nothing in the legal rules, the advice from Louise was that might be the best attitude not to participate. So obviously there was at least one other person who wouldn't actually, but that was revealed basically by the one who actually seen the YouTube footage, one hadn't.
I see. Yeah, so I don't really know if there's much that we can say. But
The members seem to be very surprised to be learning about that issue during the meeting, and they had no time to take legal advice of their own, which seems
that seems
risky.
that does seem like it's a potential thing that we ought to be looking to solve. I feel it falls outside of the remit of this committee, but I suppose we can take it on board for our processes and put it in a note, if that's okay. Alright, and you didn't have any other supplementaries for any of the other ones?
Not useful ones, no.
Okay. And right. Who else do we have? Suzanne sent her apologies, so we won't be able to ask her question. And Clive Stevens is not here, and Roger Ginson appears to not be here. So that is public forum complete. Thank you. Right, so let's move on to paper 1, local decision making. Tim, do you want to give an introduction, please?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Chair. So I'll make some very brief introductory comments on this report. So in May this year, we established a subgroup of this working group to look in a little more detail at the potential for further decision making through area committees. That working group has been meeting regularly since May, and this report sets out their findings and recommendations for consideration by the working group this morning. The main focus for discussion should be part 3 in the report, which are recommendations from the subgroup, which in short give options for enhanced role for the area committees with effect from May next year. And there's a number of matters that are set out in that section of the report, which some of which are for further decision making, others are more consultative and engagement by nature. The subsequent parts of the report look at matters which the subgroup feel wouldn't be able to be brought forward by May next year, but may well be something that future administration may want to look at in a subsequent and future phase. So that's part 4 of the report, and there were a number of other matters that the subgroup felt weren't appropriate for local decision making. And then finally, the report has got a section which presumes that there'll be a positive steer from the working group this morning, and then looking ahead to the next phase of work that the subgroup should do to report back with a little more detail around the preferred options and also some of the things around the governance of the area committees themselves. So that's the version of the report, Chair. Thank you.
Shall I come to you, Tim? Do you want to add anything?
Okay, well, just briefly, I mean, we looked through many of the suggestions and we realised, given the time frame involved and the pressures on officers, only some of this could realistically be brought back to people. And so that's our phase 1 suggestions, what we think will be realistically delivered by May. A lot of this is consultative and in a sense it's stuff that should happen anyway, but this gives a framework in which I think local ward councils can see that happening, and also the public then can be engaged in that happening within their areas. But there are 2 areas where we're actually looking to give actual direct decision-making powers, and probably the largest is going to be over local highway schemes. So, and the Highways Department being quite clear that they're re-looking at the way they work anyway, and they wanted to look at a way that could deliver locally, so this sort of combined well with what they're currently considering. So what we would be looking to do is give a lot more influence and decision making over local highway schemes, and that would be a new role for area committees from May. What we would need to do, if people are happy and content with what they see here, is then go off and we look at then the structures regarding area committees, because we had some feedback that 6 were too few, the areas were too large, and 14 were too many, it was too costly to administer. So we wanted to go off and we look at that, and obviously come back with some more details on how they will actually engage with regarding their constitution and their powers. But probably the main focus of the next bit of work would be just how many area committees it would be, and if people have views on that today, that would be useful for us to take back.
So Richard's just stuck his hand up first. So.
For my sins, I'm cert on the area committee working group, and I would concur with what Tim said. I believe that pragmatism has been a heavy pusher towards actually what a deliverable in phase 1, all which I believe, as Tim has said, largely it's consultative, but there are some key things, particularly in highways works, and we met with them most recently on Monday, and they're very much planning to set up their new teams on an area basis, so that we should work quite well. I'm quite happy with the phase 3 agreements which were not to pursue. Obviously there are some things in phase 2 which I am less supportive of. Obviously when we have the detailed analysis, that will actually sort the chaff from the wheat or the wheat from the chaff. In particular, I do think potentially allocating to area committees some planning and licensing powers may be a step too far, and actually is unlikely to actually reduce the current logjam we have in determinations.
All right. So basically, you're saying you're happy with the first phase, which is what we're bringing today. I just want to clarify, for the phase 2 working, we're envisaging that the sort of background study on that would probably commence in May, or would it also commence nowish?
I think that would be for a future council. Obviously
Right,
May is after a set of elections with
May,
councils.
yes,
And
yeah.
this is one reason why we're very keen to not part looking at area committees till after May. We wanted to
Yeah.
start that work.
Yeah, no, that's I just
brought
wanted to
that
clarify.
back, but everything in this sort of phase 2 is that may or may not happen after May. Obviously I hope it might, but
That's for the future.
yeah.
Okay, I've got Gary, Guy, Nicola.
Yeah, I mean the phase 2 stuff covers quite a wide range. Some of it might be able to be enacted quite quickly, some of it might never happen. But I think it's all for next year in discussion of the new administration. The interesting thing was with regard to the local road safety schemes that the officers had already recognised that they needed a reorganisation and a restructure. So basically we were going with their flow as well, which was actually probably one of the areas that actually the public are most concerned about and feel that they ought to have some local input onto. So I think it's quite a happy coincidence that the officers were looking that way anyway.
Okay, thank you. Guy?
Thanks, Chair. No, support absolutely what Tim and Gary said, and certainly support the principle of what Richard was saying. I think we disagree on the planning and licensing thing a bit, but I appreciate the point he's making, I concur. The point I wanted to make was specifically around enforcement activity. And I just was hoping Tim could give me a bit of a check my understanding is correct, but currently we're told relatively frequently that enforcement is discretion. We, the council, can choose not to do it or to do it. And I'm wondering under the new committee model, at whose discretion? Because my assumption is officers' discretion. And and currently that officer's discretion involves a steer usually from the mayoral cabinet, I would suggest. Is that fair?
Sorry, I don't understand. Sorry, guys.
So, for example, the choice to enforce, for example, planning enforcement or street scene enforcement, the enforcement activities that generally are covered by the joint enforcement teams
Right.
at neighbourhood level, very often we're told the reason something is not being enforced or action isn't being taken is because that enforcement is discretionary. The council's not required to enforce its own policy.
In response.
I'm talking about
Who told you that?
Officers who didn't want to enforce.
Can we just come up with
I can, just for the record, I can categorically say there is not a single example of planning enforcement that the
Yeah,
administration
planning
would
enforcement
present,
perhaps
nor
not.
street scene enforcement. I mean,
I think, no, it's things
I'm
like,
just trying to understand that.
I think maybe a better example might be like, okay, there's a person parked illegally on my road. I've sent an email to parking.enforcement, but they've said, oh, everyone parks illegally in St Paul's, we can't be bothered to go there, or something like that. And
With respect,
I don't know
there's
whether
no
that's-
cabinet member who has the time to police individual enforcement cases over parked cars.
So
I don't, and why would we ever indulge in that? You know,
So I think in
absolutely.
answer-
This sounds
I think in answer to the
slightly
question,
crackers. I'm not really sure what's happening.
it is officers. It is officers and it is intended to be officers.
But equally, I
Making the
think-
resourcing decisions about their own teams?
Yeah, I don't think officers choose not to
No.
pursue their powers either.
Well, they
Enforcement,
triage,
but
don't
why would
I think the point is that Guy's talking about like the triage, like where's the priority? Because obviously we have limited resources and can't do everything, so maybe he's trying to get at that.
I was going to say, for example, Bristol Local Enforcement Plan refers to general discretionary powers, although the council has a wide discretion in determining the appropriate level of financial penalty. I'm fairly sure, I will try and drag out the quote, I'm fairly sure the mayor has said it on a number of occasions as well. And it's not to say that cabinet members or the mayor are deciding not to enforce things, it's that there's prioritisation has to be done when resources are limited, so you decide where and what you enforce, depending on your goals. I don't think that's a controversial point to raise.
I'm just really confused what it's got to do with the agenda. Sorry, I'm trying
So
to.
Well,
is it
the
point
reason it's got to
debate.
do with the agenda is because enforcement was something that's come up from a few people, including myself, as something that may be looked at locally, and the mechanics of it are quite important. Because officers absolutely use the mayor or others as an excuse for not doing anything. Whereas if there's some local input, then
All right, I think that's maybe
Oh.
Disrespectful.
well, okay. So I think
untrue.
so
yeah. So I think that probably what we need to do here is take a step back and like answer the fundamental question of whose responsibility will it be to make the enforcement decisions, or like decisions about where the prioritisation lies. I think we can remove all of the accusations and just step back to the framing of Guy's original question, the essence of it, which is who should that fall to? And I think that the answer is it falls to the officers, and that this could allow area committees a bit more opportunity to give a steer, but is that true? Does this proposal allow that?
I mean, ultimately, it comes down to the councillors setting their budget every year.
Well,
You know, ultimately, because officers are not choosing not to do things.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? And so, if members on, successive budget rounds, in the last 8 years I've been councillor, choose to stop doing something like a library service in order to do more enforcement, then that is a choice. Does that make sense? But those are those brutal choices. There's no pot of money for enforcement that just is choosing not to be spent. It's those
Yeah.
decisions. So it is councillors' responsibility ultimately in understanding how to resource those neighbourhood enforcement teams or whatever you want to call it. But that's a toxic set of choices that we all face every budget cycle. That's
I
is the
think
crux of
I
it.
might just move us on from this, if that's all right, Guy. I think that this is just kind of getting bogged down. I think I'd rather just move on. I'm sorry. Nicola, you did have a point. Well, do you want Tim's answer?
I've asked a really honest question. Tim,
Yeah.
Am I correct? Enforcement
Yeah.
has a discretionary, yes?
So the two things I'd say, enforcement activity undertaken by the council is, as Councillor Courtney outlines, it is discretionary. The operational matters relating to enforcement are all set out in the council scheme of delegations and sit with the relevant heads of service and team managers, and that's appropriate for operational matters relating to enforcement, and that's how enforcement activity across the council is undertaken.
All right, thanks, Tim. Right, I've got, I think that's, unless you've got a separate point.
Hang on, I had my hand up before I was going to.
Yeah, no, I want to move
Yeah.
up on this point. I don't think we should be discussing this forever. Tim's given quite a clear answer that it's in the scheme of delegations, so go on and read that. Nicola had her hand up next, and then I'll take you. No, I'm moving on, Guy, I'm sorry. Nicola, you had your hand up next for a question or point.
Yeah, I mean, my first observation is thank you to the working group for this process you've been on. You can clearly see that it has been pretty comprehensive. I think my view would be at this stage is that this is sort of mainstreamed and these discussions come out of a subgroup, because I think they're really material to the running of the council. I think this piece of research is really, really good. It's given me a fresh take as a sort of 8-year councillor to like read this from like a different perspective. I think that's really, that was the point, right? I feel like I'd like it to become part of the working of the committee at this stage, because this is the point where some decisions need to get taken, and I think you can't do that in a subgroup.
So the stuff that's mentioned in section 6 of the report, next phase of work for the subgroup.
Yeah, I just think, well, and also putting flesh on the bones of, because obviously as your commentary says, it's a principled thing today, right? In principle, does these things make sense? But that's just the skeleton, and actually fulfilling even phase 1 is going to take a momentous shift on all fronts to even get to a point where in May this is deliverable, notwithstanding the budgetary pressure this will present. My detailed question, and maybe it's just a language thing, but I'm very uncomfortable with it, is the point, where are we, point 3 in the table, holding delivery of services to account as an issue. I think it's unrealistic to expect officers to be attending those sessions across the city in a service that we won't have that many people in 2023. And I think the idea of some sort of holding to account of officers in those environments may at times work, where I guess I hate the language is the first thing I'd say, and my view is that local members' responsibilities is to take that feedback from residents and then work with different departments within the local authority. Officers could support these sessions where there's a reason and it works, a consultation or something like that, but I think it just feels inappropriate. Like I don't like the phrasing of it, but it might just be a language issue.
I think it's a language issue, just that with what we were anticipating would be a written response, not officers to attend, but we were very aware of officer time.
Yeah, it's
So maybe we can reflect that better in the future.
yeah, because I think getting content and information backwards and forwards is where the value sits, right? The idea of some sort of town hall flogging for some poor person that just wants to do their job
a line
is completely inappropriate. Great, thank you.
Thanks.
We can sort that
We can reword that. For the
Yeah,
future.
by written report and whatever, yeah. That's what we envisaged.
All right, so we'll clarify that. Okay. So I've got a few. I've got a few points. I'm going to be unexpectedly antagonistic. I do support this report, but something that I kind of felt when I was reading the suggestions is that with a couple of exceptions, including the highways maintenance ones, and perhaps the disposal authority land ones, these all felt like they're not decisions happening in a committee. They felt more like management-y, or like I just want to have a conversation with an officer type things. That was what I got for quite a lot of these, like the area committee should be consulted about any new allotment provision. And I'm like, well, I'm not against that, but it feels quite like, isn't that delegated? I don't know. Like, I don't mind. I just felt like I needed to put it out there that I was reading that. So any subgroup people to respond, unless you wanted to add something, Helen, or to my point, or was it?
It's to your point.
Yeah, you can add if you wish.
I think that we're perhaps getting a little bit tied up in the difference between, I mean, I agree with you on the allotment example. Whether it's 6 or 14, which it used to be, or somewhere in the middle. If I in Hartcliffe, at the moment we're in the same area committee as Stockwood. Not many people in Hartcliffe know the geography of Stockwood. If there's some allotments proposed in Stockwood, I expect the Stockwood councillors to be asked about it. I wouldn't expect the area committee to be asked about it. So I think there are things where you would get a steer, and officers being responsive to local members is one of those. I don't think it necessarily needs to be formalised into that would have to, because you certainly wouldn't want to hold up any work, would you?
No.
If there was an opportunity for them to do it. But I think that comes back to the kind of wider point, which if you don't mind, I'll put in now, which is in many of these examples, it's about the time in the process when the sounding out or the whatever is appropriate. I mean, some of us who've been around a long time will remember at one time we used to get the surface dressing schedule and be kind of asked about it. But by that point,
it was already locked in.
It was already locked in pretty much. And actually deciding whether Acacia Avenue or, whatever was the first one to be done. It's neither here nor there, really, is it? So I think that some of the things, it's without treading back on dangerous ground again about the enforcement issue and whether that's a delegated responsibility. It's about the priorities are set, aren't they, by the committee, I would think, not the area committee. The overall priorities, this is when you would go and, a wall is falling down, that's definitely an enforcement issue. But somebody's got a door or window 6 feet away from where it was going to have been, might not be such a pressing priority. So I think it's just kind of getting this right about the timeliness and the level of steer or decision making that's needed.
Yeah. Can I come for a response?
Yeah, absolutely. When we do the next bit, you'll actually find out that we're not insisting that everything waits for 3 months for a meeting. We basically understand that partly to keep costs down, that you do not do everything every 3 months by a formal meeting, and that we need to have communications that allow things to progress quickly. Secondly, with regard to the reporting of something, your example of the allotments in Scotland, well, 2 things to say on that. Firstly, they don't at the moment contact water councils, as they should do, and basically having it so that there is a formal process that they go to committee. I think that would improve it, and that's a serious problem at the moment for all sorts of issues. And I think we will also get improvement when we rejig the boundaries of the area committees. I mean, we have a ridiculous one that stretches from Bris East to Ashton, and to have stuff in common over that area is just ludicrous. People in Bris East don't know much about what goes on in the detail of the Ashton, so making them more coherent is okay. Now, isn't necessarily the number of wards in the committee, it's also the shape and the relationship between them. Some might work fine with quite a few numbers of wards, others, you need to reach it completely. So, we will not have a position where
So I've got Marley, Nicola, Ellie. Oh, well, I'll go Ellie then, Nicola, because she has a bit more.
Thanks. So, yeah, I do feel like it was this sort of cherry picking of the issues that are listed. It doesn't feel very comprehensive. There's things that I think perhaps if you're going to go down that route should be in there that haven't been mentioned. So I just think there needs to be a sense checking on that. But also it does feel like a bit of erosion's too strong. But it's just sort of stepping into the Public Health and Communities Committee, in which a lot of these things would be for that committee to be discussing and deliberating and working on, developing and improving. So I think there's that consideration to make. I also have to question what's meant by equitable distribution of funding across the city. I think the word equitable means different things to different people. I think Clive James put in a statement that Clive Stevens. Yes. Clive Stevens, sorry. I've never met Clive, but I know of him. Anyway, he wrote in a statement this morning that I think speaks to the point quite well about what is meant by that, and to the point of like reshaping the area committees, ensuring that that doesn't in fact ensure equitable distribution of funding, and by that I would mean raising up the areas that are most socially deprived in the city, and that would be what equity means. Or are we talking about equal funding, which is given the same amount no matter where you are in the city? So I think a distinction in that would be really valuable to understand if you're going to.
So I think that's certainly something that the next phase of work is going to prioritise. Certainly about how, it's mentioned in section 6, how that's going to be broken up. That's, well, yeah,
we are talking about equitable regarding that funding pot. So taking into account deprivation and taking into account that across the city. So not dividing the pot equally amongst area committees, in particular for that particular funding pot. Other funding pots might be different. So highways might be a different approach. That might be more of you've spread that more equally across the city. But in particular, that pot, we were talking equitable. We met on Monday with the officers to begin that process of trying to work out how you would create an equitable funding pot. But probably one example could be taking strongly into account areas, the areas of deprivation, the local super outlet areas of deprivation, as was done with the previous funding recently, and so giving them a very heavy weighting. So a lot of the money would follow those communities.
Yeah. Cool.
And I understand the point of the question, because actually that was never part of the previous neighbourhood partnerships. Money was always just divided by number of councillors and didn't take that into account at all.
Yeah.
So we're not proposing that this time.
That is good. Right, we've got my Nicola Guy.
Thanks, Chair. Just a side point, if that is something that's going to be considered sort of at a future stage, I would definitely agree with what Nicola said about this possibly being mainstream to the whole committee, because I think there's some really important discussions there, and it's really important that we get that right, and I think it just benefit from all councillors being involved on that. The use of language, I just want to interrogate slightly. So there's a few points where it says the area committee should be consulted in various areas, and obviously there's debates to be had about, in some areas people might think it's more appropriate to have local decision making, and in some areas it might be more appropriate to have that wider strategic decision making from the policy committee. I just want to work out what the should be consulted requirement would actually entail. Would it mean a policy committee would come up with a proposal, it would then go to the area committee and they give their views on it, and then that then goes back to the policy committee to make a decision? How would this in practice work? Or was it all just interrogating ongoing sort of policies and practice of the council to see if they're working effectively, and they can then be considered at a higher level by the citywide policy committee? I didn't quite understand how it all fits together under my head, trying to map out anyway how the new committee system and decision making is going to work, which is already given me a headache. Then adding the section level, I just want to have that clear understanding of how it's going to feed into that sort of almost flow chart.
Sort of what Ellie was saying about there's we want to make sure that there's no encroachment of the strategic into the area committee. it should be very much like if an area committee, I don't know, let's take Easton, and Easton just for some reason really wants to have their own thing about bins.
Really?
Their own thing about bins, because that's all we ever talk about. How would there be like a communication between the citywide bin strategy and the Eastern bin strategy?
Yeah.
Something.
And sort of building from that point as well, I'd just like to sort of quite clarify, similar to what Helen said, what's the advantage of consulting area committees, and why would that be better than consulting individual ward councillors on what's going on their wards?
I guess the answer to that is in the main local councillors are not consulted at this point.
And it's
Sure,
a formal opportunity. I think that's the point. It's like that there is a formal opportunity to say there is an allotment coming.
Okay.
We'll just tell them at the next area committee.
Thank you. And if that's sort of the point that we're getting at, why then not require more formal arrangements for individual ward councillors to be consulted?
Well, we've passed a motion in council about that. It's been mostly been ignored.
Well, I think we can move over that. But I think it's valuable, but probably because these are areas where it's fairly likely to have a cross, like more than just a single ward.
I mean, this also puts it into the public domain for the public as well. So obviously, when there is consultation in councils, it's often in private. It then does put an opportunity for that. I mean, it should occur. Consultation with councillors should really occur. And in some cases it does occur, and in some cases it does not. I work in the allotments one, it's a perfect one. I have new allotments coming in my ward. The officers actually refused to speak to me about it. Ellie knows, she was copied on the email exchange. But the officers told me they would not speak to me about Oaklands Avenue, which is unbelievable, isn't it? As a ward councillor, you've got a piece of council-owned land in your ward, you can't even get officers to speak to you about it. But that's a separate issue. This is about trying to ensure there is a framework for public discussion about local issues. And actually, this is about also relieving the pressure on the central committees, because otherwise all those local issues are going to turn up at the central committee. Whereas actually, the more localised issue of why isn't the grass being cut in my park as often as I want, can go to the area committee, and that means the central committee get on with the more strategic work that it needs to do. You make a good point actually on what's the flow, and I'm not too sure what the flow would be regarding at what point do you consult the area committee first, then go to the strategic committee, or do you look back? You have to try and make it as efficient as possible. I guess one thing you can do is look at how do other councils work, particularly with parish councils, because a lot of this is not dissimilar to parish councillors in their role as legal consultee. So quite often actually something is flung to them first and say this is what we're proposing, and then you put their feedback into part of a strategic report. I wouldn't think that's too common, but that might occur on occasion. I get the point.
So I think that Marnie, before I bring you in, I think the main thing there is that we need to put that specific point into the next phase of work. That's just clearly something we need to identify and just hash out. Nicola.
Yeah, thank you. So we'd agreed already that we were not going to create parish councils in this new system, if you recall.
Yeah,
I'm sure you do recall. And so I happen to know quite a lot of parish councillors because I'm a geek. And I think one of the biggest things that they have, of course, is their precept. So more often than not, people are turning up to parish councils to spend their precept money, which they are paying for. We're not in that situation, and so I think it's a bit of a slightly concerning narrative if we start to frame any of this in that sense, because constitutionally that is not what these things are.
Use that as an example.
No, I understand, but I just make, because I'm not in the subgroup, so obviously I have no idea if you're all sat there like Macbeth, which is trying to set up a parish council by the back door. I assume not. So then that's a joke, by the way. So my actual
local democracy review, if you want.
my actual question is, people are not going to turn up to the St George Future Area Committee to advocate for something to happen in Islington, right? As a matter of fact, the people attending these forums in the future will be self-motivated. Obviously, they're in voluntary capacity in their free time and able to travel somewhere to go and talk about the mowing regime of Troopers or something, I don't know, just to give an example. So, in the world in which our old local government is operating, I think my support for this paper is conditional on really understanding that healthy tension in practice, because I suspect what you will find with the situation we are in at the council is only going to get more acute in the immediate term, is lots of people, if it's a talk to, which all the items on this list are council projecting out, and I will talk about that in a second as well, that there will be lots of times when people will ask for things that cannot be delivered, right, inherently, because
Legally
because
or
of
operationally, yeah.
just because of
Yeah.
where we are in local government finance, you know, so I'm just trying to understand that dynamic of the wrap up and wrap down, because no one's going to turn up to St George Area Committee and say, well, I think we should have some more lots in Brisbane, and that's not going to happen. So when they find out that their plan wasn't delivered because they moved on to somewhere of greater need, that's going to be an interesting dynamic to navigate. And so I just wanted to, I think it's difficult, I'll go to the second point. The second point is that it's difficult to agree this because I'm not clear on exactly what the outcome of this meeting needs to be. Are we agreeing some sort of motion? Are we agreeing some, like, I don't really understand what you're going to walk away today, and I think that's quite important to try and crystallise.
Well, okay, so there's the questions, which we can come to shortly. I do have a few more points.
Can I make my final point very quickly?
Okay.
My final point is this does feel very talk to, but I think some of the value of these future forums, whatever shape and size they take, is, for instance, trying to give the tools for communities to write their own climate action plan, for instance, across the whole city, and that's a completely autonomous piece of work that informs local government policy. So it's not decisions going down, it's decisions coming up that are actually insightful and supported by the voluntary sector organisations that we have in the city and all those great resources. That is not anywhere on this list, and that. So I can't really support this until I understand what the true potential of these things are, rather than just top down out. It should be out and up, and I don't see that in this report anywhere. So that if I
That last
feel
point
like I
of
feel a bit
yours,
nasty, that's
that last point of yours, it's on the phase 2.
but I think that is the fundamental power of these groups,
Yeah.
and I think we should do that before we do some of the things in here. Given
Well,
where we
the
are.
things in phase 1 are identified as being simple to implement now, and the things in phase 2 are things where more work will need to be done by.
And I
So
think
you think we should just not do the phase 1?
No, I just think without speaking to the voluntary sector properly, we will not understand the true power of these local groups, and I think it's not a Bristol Council forum. I think we need to reach out to Bosca and our other voluntary sector organisations to understand between now and May how we empower local people to inform policy. It should be the other way around, and that's not really present in this. It might have been outside the scope of the subgroup, but I think this undertakes this some way, and I think we should change the order of the phasing to facilitate those discussions with the voluntary sector now.
Okay, well I suppose we are doing our consultation with local people, or not consultation, meetings, that's the word, meetings with local people next month, so maybe some of that will come in. I have Guy, Lorraine, Gary, Helen, and then I'm going to have to start asking the questions, right? And Guy.
No, just to come back on that point, I agree wholeheartedly. I think everyone on the working group would agree wholeheartedly. Those are absolutely things that need to happen in this way. The reason they're in phase 2 is because, as members have said many times, if we're going to do these things, we need to get the detail right. They need to be done really well. They need to be done as effectively as we can with the resources that we've got. And figuring that out is going to take a little bit more time. And including that consultation, but I would say, certainly from the consultation meeting that Tony and I attended, also the community sector and the voluntary sector were very, very well attended. And the feedback that we had absolutely consistently was, you need to bring the council to the neighbourhoods. You need to be having these conversations here where they're accessible to local people. And it's one of those areas where I think there's a real danger of the perfect being the enemy of the good. Yes, this process, these ideas absolutely could be better with more resource, with more attention and time. But is what we're proposing here better than what we currently have in terms of full council and cabinet for engagement? I think the answer from those consultations was absolutely unequivocal, yes.
I'd say no because there's no budget. So until there's a budget for this,
Well,
I
so
have
most
to
of
say
these,
no. I
yeah.
have to say it's not better
So,
because I don't understand how you're going to finance this without voluntary sector support. So I would say no, it's not better. That's my concern.
So has that been a concern from the officers, I suppose? I'll go back to use the chair of the subcommittee.
Well, the
The things in phase
Well,
one.
we were looking at this previously,
Yeah.
it was very clear they were worried about cost. It was one of the clear instruction given to us that they didn't want a costly proposal brought back to them. So we brought back a cost-efficient proposal. Now, to do some of the things Nicola suggested sound great, and that's why a lot of that is in phase two. That is hundreds of thousands of pounds potentially of additional cost.
Yeah.
Through to a lot of Steve actually brought a really great idea to the group, which was actually we take sort of the one city approach, we're making a neighbourhood approach, we bring in other funding pots from the public sector, but also from the private sector. We're aware that there are lots of funding pots there. We all thought that was an absolutely fantastic idea and actually could solve some of the funding problems. The problem is that's a very big piece of work and not something we can deliver in a few weeks. So for us, that was actually, we thought one of the biggest things to go off and explore as part of a later piece of work, of how could you bring together all these little mini funding pots, which actually are probably not always spent that well because they're so small, and perhaps if you gave, I mean, we're the co-op employs people out of every store to do community work. Could we get their people to work as part of a set agreed community plan, and then we start to bring together all this other funding. So I would just say that what we brought here is a cost efficient proposal for improving the way area committees currently work and making them more useful and working well alongside the strategic committees and improving engagement between the council and their neighbourhoods. It is not though the final proposal. What we're saying is this is the first stage, and we think that a new council will hopefully go and explore some of these bigger items more in the future. Otherwise, your choice is that fiscal area committees literally have nothing on their agenda because there's virtually no sale for most or scrapping them.
All right. Next.
Just very quickly, because you said it's cost effective, but I haven't seen that. If it's
Well,
cost effective, can I see the costs? I
So,
apologise, I'm not trying to
I
be
think-
awkward, but I've not seen
No, but I
that.
think most of these is like fairly clear that it's just like some officer has to send some emails and that's all the, and then there's like a bit of back and forth discussion.
Is
So-
that what you're saying? Because that's not what it says. So I'm not trying to be awkward, I'm just trying to understand what you say is cost efficient.
One of the biggest issues with cost will be how many neighbourhood committees do you want. Because obviously that changes your amount of meetings. Servicing the meetings is where most of the costs will be. That, we'd say that's a big argument in itself. And that was then, if you agreed with these principles, we then know roughly the workload that will be faced. Then the big argument then is how many neighbourhood committees should there be? At the moment we have a figure between 6 and 14. It could be 6, could be 14, or likely somewhere in the middle. But of course that then increases your cost for your number of meetings. We don't necessarily think this necessarily involves a substantial amount of additional meetings. At the moment there are 2 meetings for each area committee. You could argue about whether or not this is 2, 3 or 4 meetings a year, this extra workload. Then the big issue is how many committees are there, and then we can reflect on what effect that has in cost. We know what it costs to provide the current service, so we can come back and give you a fairly clear cost, but a lot of it is just bureaucratic. There is no extra funding sense of into services here, because we're very, very aware of costs on the council, and we have no remit to often spend substantially more money.
All right. I think that's clear. Thank you. So I've got Lorraine.
Thank you, Chair. My point is kind of going back a little bit, not as in lots of going back too far, but it's my fundamental question is about what was the aim of the working group, because I've had this thought in my head from when it was established, and I think what we need to, what I would like for us to consider is the fundamental question was, do we want some devolution to take place to local level. And whether this is the phase one is great, not great, it's whether we feel in principle that that's the right thing to do. And if we, and the guys have gone away, sorry guys, not because you're all men, just in general, gone away and they've done some really good work and trying to unpick it a little bit. So I'm not so concerned about whether the minutiae in regards to it, because I think if it's delayed, but it's the principle of it moving forward into 2024, as opposed to I don't like the sound of that, or that's rubbish, or that's shit, or whatever. Do you know what I mean? So I think there's some. I think that's where I think my head is.
Yeah.
Do we feel that some devolution of power needs to go into community, and whether we've got this right or not, it's kind of irrelevant. Thanks, guys, and we need to move forward in that regard, because we might end up saying all of those categories are pretty not great, but do we still want it to happen? And then that's where the work goes. That's
Well, I think that when we set up the working group, we did so on the assumption that we wanted to devolve some things, should there be any useful things to devolve. And they've come back with a list of things
and that's
that,
what we're going to vote on.
that we're going to vote on. I may have had a few more hands, but I think it's probably a good time to start sort of specifically answering the question. I did have you, Gary. Can I take you quickly? Or
Yes. Basically, with regard to costings, we were very careful with regard to that. And that's why the local traffic schemes are there, and other things possibly that we would like to be there are not there in phase one, because the officers said that they felt that they could probably more cost effectively deliver some of these schemes with local input.
Okay.
And that's some of the big schemes that with local input might run significantly better. I've had experience of that myself in my own ward. And secondly, it is not a matter of, the council saying, right, you've got so much money, unless you've got a budget for doing this. Basically, these organisations will help to develop their own budget and their own ideas going forward. That's part of the idea of stage two.
Okay.
Because basically, I've got things in my ward which run very efficiently without council money.
All right. I got a quite urgent hand from this corner, so I will go to you. And then
Ellie first, go on.
okay.
Well, mine's just quite quick. So I think there's a sense of being aware of duplication, what's already happening in this area. I don't know if Penny German was involved in your discussions. And the One City, Many Communities model was brought up and discussed, which is kind of like what you were referring to with Steve's point, that work is in train. So it's whether this is feeding into that, or if it's trying to recreate a version of that in terms of, I just think there seems to be a duplication sense check.
So the I guess you haven't been in the meetings, but Tim has made it quite clear that this has been, all of the key officers have been involved, and all of the suggestions have kind of come from officers saying, like, we think this is an opportunity, as opposed to, well, I suppose you could do this. I think that it was that approach. That's what I heard, at least.
Well, we put about 25 suggestions to officers on a spreadsheet. They then responded to those, including like deliverability, cost, roughing and cost, etc. And then pretty much all those officers were invited in face-to-face discussions, online. Penny German we met a couple of times. Transport we met a couple of times. All the sort of directorates that were affected by those suggestions. And that's where we started to whittle down what was completely undeliverable. So an example of completely undeliverable, neighbourhood plans. Neighbourhood plans legally can be delivered by area committees. So that knocked that one out. So that was quite good feedback. So that solved any argument. It wasn't actually something within the legal power of an area committee to be involved with. And then a lot of it was more practicalities and finance. We don't have the teams to support this. Practically, this would interfere in our work. So some of those ideas would be kicked into 3, or we said, well, we'd like to come back and discuss that further. But you can see there was a substantial amount of work to get through to do that, and that's why it went into 2. There was a lot of talk actually about being able to do more about community planning, working with community groups. Penny German was, I think, very supportive of that, but pointed out there was a cost to doing that work, and her teams at the moment were not in a place that they could deliver that work. And that's why we put it into sense so that we would like to look at again, but would have to be a later phase because of what was being put to us was the substantial cost involved. We very much took the remit of don't come back to us with something that's going to cost a lot of money. So at this stage, I think it would take I say that political decision where you decide where to put the money at a budgetary level if you wanted then to be doing some of this other work, which hopefully the council might choose to do in the future. But we were very aware of that. So that's why some of these proposals are limited. We agree with that. I would love to see far more being put in. But we were all very aware of cost implications.
All right. So, Helen.
Yeah. It's just three quick points, and I haven't been part of the working group, so you may well have discussed this, and Tim, please stop. But I think sometimes we're getting a bit mixed up between the kind of what the council's going to do and the how is it going to do it, and the involvement of area committees or ward councillors in those questions, isn't it? So is it the council saying, we're going to do X, what do you think? Or we're going to do X, and how do you want us to do it in your patch? That's one thing. The other thing, and I'm sorry, but I do think we should just flag up that some of the tone of this discussion has been, it's going to be that we're going to be able to hold officers to account. I know that point has been made, and that we never get told anything. While we've been sitting here, an email has just popped up from an officer telling us, the Hartcliffe and Witherwood councillors, about the installation of sprinklers into the multi-storey blocks. So the idea that we don't get asked and told about what's going on is rubbish. The third one.
I'm in your threads. I know that you get lots of emails.
I think no, stop that now.
The third
one.
I just don't think
it comes back to Nicola's point about the involvement of the voluntary community sector in area working. And I would encourage the working group, if you're going to carry on, we're going to take that decision in a minute, about looking at the new locality partnerships and the model of working. And just very, very briefly, at the Health and Wellbeing Board on Wednesday, we had a presentation about the Mental Health and Wellbeing Integrated Network Partnership, MINT, which is happening in your, in the 3 locality partnerships. And what was fantastic about that presentation and the improvement in the access to mental health services and the involvement of the voluntary community sector in that work is that, yes, something is handed down from the integrated care system. You've got to look at community mental health. But what became very, very clear in the presentation that we had on Wednesday afternoon is that how that's delivered in the North Bristol Locality Partnership, how it's delivered in ICE in the Central and East, and how it's delivered in South are very, very different because of the needs of those areas. And we know that the locality partnerships are too big in our world, but it was really, really instructive that strategy comes from on high, but how it's delivered in the locality partnerships is very much in their gift, and it was brilliant actually, wasn't it, to hear that. So do have a look. Get the 3 partnership directors, or one of them to come along and talk to you about how that's being done and the engagement of the voluntary sector at that level.
That's a really helpful suggestion. Thanks, Helen. Okay, so I'm going to move us to kind of decision making. I'm aware that Lorraine's just left the room for phone call. But so yeah, I just want to say in phase 1, are we happy with to support the implementation of the phase 1 contingent on the follow-up work that's proposed to be done by the subgroup, or potentially we bring that to the non-group? Oh God, that was a really long question. Sorry, maybe that's not the right one to start with. Yeah, do we feel in favour of the phase 1? Hands up. Yes.
Is that with display?
Yeah, with some.
Officers to account.
Yeah, I think that line is going to be changed to be more appropriate to what they wanted to say. Yes. So, Guy, what are you saying?
I'm really sorry, I appreciate this may feel to some like I'm going back to an earlier point. If we're moving straight to a vote on each of the questions, there is a point I would really like to get across.
Okay.
And each time I've raised it, there's been an interruption, which is part of the cut and trust of all of this. But as a result, I've been cut up and it's not come back to this point. I think it's important. One of the things that gets raised with me absolutely continuously as a councillor is this issue around enforcement. And can we get enforcement to happen?
Guy. Okay.
Third time. May I?
Okay. But I may ignore you. But okay, go on. Go on.
I can cite, for example, I can cite an email in front of me.
What's your crux? What's the crux of
My
that?
crux is, I feel it's important to leave the door open to enforcement steer happening in phase 1. I say this because the arguments I've heard against doing that don't seem to stack with what we have seen done previously, where it's possible for neighbourhood, not even neighbourhood committees, what were then called neighbourhood forums.
Okay.
So in other words, just wards to steer enforcement priorities. The police do it. Evidence that they're very open with people. We have operational priorities. There are things we must cover that are vital, but where there is capacity, where there is resource, we will try and address these issues that local community might have.
Okay.
I feel this was an issue that was ruled into phase 2 because, at least in part, the officer that was presenting to the subgroup was the first that came forward. It was a complete easy process, and it was kind of ruled out at that point. But if it comes out of the consultation events, strongly that this is something that communities would favour, I'd really like to pull this into phase 1. The resource implications are zero.
I would just, we'll take a vote on that first then. So who would like to move, sorry, we missed this particular. Guy's just proposed that we move the community enforcement at a community level being steered by councillors / area committees into phase 1. So I'm just going to take a flat vote on that.
Sorry, I appreciate I stepped out.
Oh, I was trying to clarify and then you weren't listening to my clarification. For your benefit again, sorry. Community, it's really loud. Enforcement of certain things being done at community level, having a steer from area committees / councillors, is currently in phase 2. Guy's proposing that we move it into phase 1. So I'm going to take a vote on that. Right, who's in favour of bringing it into phase 1? I've got 3. Who is against?
I think it's not proposed, but I appreciate it.
So 6.
Yeah. And abstention? 1. Alright. So back to the main phase 1 point. We've got one small edit that we want to make, which is the holding and delivery of services to account matter, which we've said we're going to reframe in a way that doesn't sound quite as hostile to officers. Bearing that in mind, who supports further work on the phase 1 implementation of this proposal in the paper? In favour?
Provided it's come to this group and the subgroup disbands, then yeah.
Are you going to, is your hand up now? No. Okay.
Sorry,
Question C.
are you going through the questions? A to what?
This is question C, yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So question C, there was 8 of you, I think.
Sorry, can I abstain?
Sorry, can we just do it one at a time? So
Okay.
does the working group support the implementation of phase 1 options in May 24? 3 raise your hand for yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Lorraine, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Okay. Against? No. And abstains? 2. All right. So D, phase 2. So this is in the future, and I think the main point about this is, yeah, it's going to be for whoever is running the council in 2024 to work into their budgets, to work into their resourcing, for them to work out a plan for this phase 2 to occur, and then to be potentially implemented in some capacity that we don't know. That's phase 2's framing. So does the working group support the phase 2 options for local decision making, and that these should be considered in more detail in the future?
I think you should say potential.
Yes,
It's more
potential. Yeah, as opposed to these are the ones. Those in favour of that?
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Against?
1, 2, 3, 4.
And abstentions?
1, 2.
Right. Let's go to the next council.
future
Long
thing,
grass.
Well, we can't hold a future administration to
Well, no.
Yeah.
It's sort of putting full
No,
seal there. It's
All right,
taking-
all right, all right. And something we haven't actually discussed at all. The options that are not recommended to be taken forward to be not taken forward. I suppose we don't even really need to vote on that because it doesn't involve us doing anything. Guy?
Well, yes, I think, as Councillor Hopkins noted the previous one, the words at this time
Yeah, at this time.
absolutely makes sense.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to rule anything out permanently on the basis that it's really a good idea, we just don't have the cash for it right now.
Okay, yeah.
So as long
I
as it's
think-
understood as being at this time,
Yeah,
absolutely
all right.
fine.
All right, we'll take that as read, I think.
No,
Oh, okay, should we
No.
vote on it?
it's a change in the meaning. I think it reflects
Okay.
what was intended, but I want to make sure it's clear.
Yeah, yeah, so that's, yeah, for local decision making right now. So we're going to stop talking about it in the local working sub-discussions, which may not be sub-discussions, they may be mainstreamed. Okay, I'm just going to leave that because I think you agree. So,
I can see.
question F is, does the working group support the recommendation for the next phase of work for the area committee subgroup? And there was a question raised, is it still a subgroup, or do we want to bring it into the main group? Nicola wants to sit in the main group, Marley's sort of main group.
I would say, actually, we've had green meetings every Monday afternoon from now until mid-December. So frankly, we're going to meet that actually time frame.
Okay.
I don't think we can, but we can and should bring the recommendations in.
Okay, so there's a couple of potential ways forward on that, which is that we could open the invitation to anyone who wants to go.
Nicola, do you want to join the working group? That might be the way to
I mean,
solve
that might be
this.
the way to solve it.
She
just wants to
Yeah. The recommendations still have to come back to this group to be approved, or not.
Yeah, we're going to make it.
As before, we don't make any decisions. There's no such rule as with this committee about having named subs. Anyone from any party group can attend on behalf of their party. That's absolutely fine.
I think my
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, Claire. My concern is that we're making decisions or not making decisions at the same time here, because there is no decision being taken today, really, because it's all subject to full council, and it feels then we've got this kind of upwards and downwards thing going on, where I feel quite uneasy. Perhaps that's because I'm not on the subgroup and I'm a control freak. I appreciate all those points, but it's about some of like the caveat. You know, this all sounds quite casually caveated, I guess is what I'd say. Whereas I'm used to things being quite formally caveated, right? So caveats on budgets, caveats on further working, caveat. You know, like what can actually be done by May. Like, you know, there's a kind of reality check to some of this, and I feel today's meeting is difficult because you're in this slightly abstract space still, but at the same time we're voting on something. Does that make sense? That makes me personally feel uncomfortable, which was the origins of why I said some of the debate should be in the committee level.
Yeah, so I think the main actual debates that aren't really difficult is about how we break it down, or like maintain the equity as best we can, that sort of thing, and the numbering, like the funding, effectively that we foresee it having to have. Those are going to be decisions that have to come back, but the point of the subgroup is to do the research and have a bit of oversight over that research. So, and we will be getting reports, verbal reports. Richard and
Will I make a very quick practical, and it certainly isn't a criticism of any individual member. As you know, the Labour Group's previous representative, Steve Pearce, is now the acting Lord Mayor, so he has had to resign. Your group chair, Councillor Reynolds, now taking the role. Obviously, we're meeting Monday afternoon, so certainly the last two, it has commitments as a cabinet member. He hasn't been able to attend, so I do think there is an issue of perhaps Labour having a representative who could regularly attend.
yeah, so I think that's probably the main thing we need to solve.
I mean, that's news to me that Councillor Reynolds on that working group, because it's not on this
Okay.
committee.
So we also
Sorry,
a very quick one is just send the papers to all of the
We can
working
invite
group.
everybody.
Let's take
But
this.
it's
All right.
I just feel that some
No,
of this
everyone, right.
heard the internet.
Let's just say that there's going to be an additional discussion with you two, please. There's going to be an additional discussion specifically within the Labour group that I'm just going to tell you have to have. You're not invited back. And
I like this form of
Seems like there is
I agree.
a smaller one control
Okay.
freak in the room.
Yeah. You wouldn't have noticed. So you're going to do that. You're going to agree with Tim who's going, whether it's rotating, whether he just sends the papers to the whole Labour group and a random person turns up.
No, not the
You
Labour
can-
group.
No, the whole
No,
Labour group.
No, thank you.
Right, I agree. We'll do that.
I'll talk to Nicola afterwards.
We'll do that, and I think that is what we're going to do instead of moving that subgroup discussion back into the main group, because it seems like the main issue is that Labour are not well represented at the moment. Right.
Just one, I'm going to reiterate, thank you Chair, my point that I made earlier. It's a working group, we're talking about 24, that somebody's mentioned already in the room. So we're looking at a working group that's looking at phase 1 and how it can be developed, which you've already talked about. So this is about, we're not talking about changing the process today, are we? We're saying in 2024 on the next committee system, this potentially could happen. So we need to bear that in mind, that this isn't, sorry,
So we're talking about just the continuation of this working group for the next few months to solve some of those outstanding issues.
yes, yes, sorry, let me make myself clear, sorry Tim. Yes, I understand that, that's perfect. But what I meant was, any implementation would take place in 2024.
Oh, right.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, phase 1. Yeah.
So yeah, on phase 1.
Okay.
So therefore, I think this is something about, it's about the group. It is not about Labour. It is not about anybody. It is about the group in this room discussing it and moving forward. That's what we're talking about. So if in any other group, if somebody's not present in a committee or whatever, then you know, that's their responsibility type thing. So let's just move on and not just get distracted. Phase 1, the group are doing a fantastic job. They're going to go away and research and come back.
Yeah. If I may leave it there,
Councillor Francis made my point
Great.
beautifully.
Yeah, that was very helpful, thank you. And right, we're going on to our next report. report. It's all about, well, it's kind of miscellaneous other stuff, isn't it? So, Tim, take it away.
Thank you, Chair. So the miscellaneous other stuff report covers parts 3 and 4 of the Council's constitution. Part 3 is a number of matters relating to the roles and responsibilities of different parts of the Council, and this part should be fairly straightforward. There's some things that we currently have that are not reflected in part 3 of the constitution, and the proposal is to just bring those into the right place in part 3. So the first of those is the Downs Committee, which many members will be familiar with, and then the second proposal is in respect of the Harbour Committee, which good practice recommends that we have as a standalone committee. And then the other two matters in respect of part 3 relates to two things that were raised at the last meeting. One is about the lead member for Children's Services, and the proposal in the report is that that becomes the responsibility of the chair of the Children and Young People Committee, and that shouldn't be controversial. And then for clarification for the committee, the arrangements around emergency planning are also set out in the report for information. And then turning to part 4, where there's a little bit more detail around some of the rules of procedure that we need to review. The access to information procedure rules will need to be updated to reflect the conversations that were had last time around urgent decision making. So that should be fairly straightforward. And then looking at the detail of policy and budget framework procedure rules, there will need to be some work done to revise those rules to reflect the requirement for the Finance Subcommittee and Strategy and Resources Committee to have that oversight of the preparation of the Council's annual budget, and also potentially some changes to the very specific arrangements around how the budget meeting works. And those are, in my view, all quite technical and shouldn't be particularly contentious rules that will need to be amended. The next part looks at the officer employment rules, and we have under our current arrangements the officer objection procedure, and so the working group may want to consider whether we replicate such arrangements under the committee model. It's not legally required, but it might be something that there's a broad acceptance that we should continue those rules. The next part of the report talks about the committee procedure rules, and this is really with an emphasis on the arrangements for public forum, and the proposal in the report is to standardise the arrangements to ensure consistency across all of our council meetings. So the proposal in the report mirrors the arrangements that we currently have in place for full council, and also for cabinet meetings as they are at the moment. The proposal in the report is that we incorporate those types of arrangements into the policy committee procedure rules that will be drafted in due course, and like I say, to ensure consistency with the other rules that we have for other decision making in the council. In terms of the policy committee procedure rules, there are some additional matters that build on what was previously agreed by full council in July, and that is just to provide that clarity around setting up task and finish groups and cooperative arrangements, and the arrangements around forward plans and work programmes, the public forum rules and petitions that we've already considered previously. And then the final matter relates to the escalation panel, and again we outlined the scope of those rules that was endorsed by full council in July, and the additional matter is around how we ensure appropriate political proportionality and ensure representation on that panel as and when it needs to be stood up, that there isn't conflict with those who have previously been decision makers, and we would do that through the whips, which is the way that we currently do calling procedures for the current scrutiny calling arrangements. Those are the key points in the report, Chair. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yes, thank you. So I think the way I want to work through this is literally to just go through the questions, because they're all quite disparate. So I am going to just say, does the working group support the proposal to incorporate the governance arrangements for the Downs Committee into Part 3 of the Council's constitution. Does anyone have any strong...
Aye.
Alright, we're agreed. Same question, but for the Harbour Committee. Anyone? Great. Discharge for the responsibilities for the lead member of the Children's Services. Are we happy that it's Guy?
Yeah.
We happy that it's Guy? Guy has a point. Guy, what was your point?
I was going to ask if there is a member on the committee who's held that role, because obviously it's a really significant role in terms of being responsible for both strategy and delivery, and under the committee system, scrutiny of. And that's a role that I think would demand the full attention of whoever's doing it. If there are members who hold that role that feel that should be the chair, absolutely, I would go with their judgment. Equally, if they feel no, I would want to be an advocate for the service, for the strategy on that committee, and have someone else chair it.
It's like legal responsibility.
But legally it has to be the chair, can't not be.
Well, it's not the chair will have access to information that a normal member wouldn't have access to.
Ultimately, it's a legal.
Unless
There's a real tension.
if that's the, and I'm getting nods from Helen, it's the only person I think has held this
I
role.
haven't held children's, but I've worked with people who have, including, there were people from the other parties, because Claire Hiscott had that role, Claire Campion-Smith had that role. So that is the legal responsibility of the cabinet member, and the most obvious read across is to the chair of the committee, the relevant committee.
All right. Those in favour of question? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Easy. Next one might be a bit more contentious. So, do we want to retain this executive objection procedure for senior officer appointments? From our discussion last time, I felt it seemed superfluous. It seemed like one of those, like, oh, it's a fail-safe, but it doesn't. It's never been used, and it seems quite a lot of power to give someone.
And the reality, Chairman, is I'm personally the cabinet member usually chairs that selection committee.
Exactly.
The policy committee chairman will impeach her.
Yeah.
All right. Is everyone? So let's ask the question as it's written. Should we retain this executive objection procedure? Those in favour?
It can't be an executive.
Well, yeah, something akin to. So I'm asking question D. Sorry.
Can I just, last time, because I was questioning that, wasn't I thought it was really useful what Tim had said to explain it. So it might be useful, Tim, if you could just say what you said last time, and I went, okay, I get it now. Is that
Well,
right?
it's in the report.
It's in the
Where is
report.
it?
Fine, that's fine. Let's just go away then and disagree.
All right. So yes, question D.
It's fine.
Those in favour of keeping? Of keeping?
Sorry, it's my own popular
What's the
opinion.
harm in having it?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
It's an unpopular view, but I think it.
Those against keeping it? 1, 2, 3.
Why would you get
I don't think it would
I don't like
legally survive a legal challenge.
Oh, really?
Someone
What was that?
Oh, you think it wouldn't survive a legal challenge if someone
I
blocked
think
it?
it really puts us in quite a dodgy bank. That's my personal view, and I need a lawyer.
I have to say, it's
I know
a
it doesn't
lawyer.
seem that conservative.
That's why I said, can you explain it again?
I'm not concerned that the process will be used frequently, if at all. So that's,
Okay.
That's what
And abstentions? 1. Right, so that's gone through. We're keeping it. Okay, the most controversial question, which we probably do want to have a little time for, has sub-questions in it. So this is, question E is the main question, but if you then scroll up one page, committee procedure, yeah, hang on, where is it? Yes, committee procedure rules, there are 4 bullet points. Should there be a limit, this is the bottom one, should there be a limit on the length of public forum statements? I really think, if someone sent in a 10,000 word statement, that would be not very fair.
Should we start at the top?
Maybe. Okay, let's start at the top. I don't know. I just
OCD sort of
no,
demands
it's fair enough. Fair enough. I'm trying to throw you all off. Okay. Should public forum for all committees be from people who live or own a business in Bristol?
Yeah.
Aye.
Yeah.
Hang on, we've got
Is it not work as well?
No, it's not work. So that is a key point that you might want to bring up. You're allowed to stand as a councillor if you work in Bristol, but when it comes to policies, working in Bristol and living in Gloucester, maybe you shouldn't. Okay.
Comment very briefly. It's to do with payment of council tax or business rates. That's the rationale.
Sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Can I just, I call this the David Redwell rule? Because can I just say you pass this, you eradicate David Redwell from all meetings, because David Redwell, as far as I know, I might be wrong, as far as I know, David doesn't live in Bristol. He is an avid attender at our meetings and provides quite interesting information. But and the organisation he represents is not a business, it's a campaign group.
Absolutely, only has about 10 hats.
It's, I was going to say, it's several.
I'm sure you'll find a way around it. I'm just wondering if we really want to be that restricted. Have we found it's been massively abused in the past? I don't think so. And I'm just wondering, do we really want to bring this rule in?
Interesting point. Gary and Guy.
I can give an example of somebody who is director of a charity, not a business, in Bristol, who was allowed to speak recently at full council and actually contributed something which some people found useful. And therefore, I think that we should be careful about being too restrictive.
All right.
Doesn't a charity count as a business for these purposes?
No.
If it's a charity with a...
Not this paying.
But the charity
Not paying.
itself-
It's a charity with a property, with an office.
But it doesn't necessarily. No, because charity might not pay rates. I
Well,
don't know.
sadly these days, I think so.
Oh.
They do.
It could be a community group, which is the same way.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that would be affected. What do you think?
I think the charity would probably be okay with
Yeah.
this, and we would give it as little an interpretation as possible.
Okay. Guy and then Lorraine.
It's a restriction on public forum. I don't see why we do it unless we have to. It's at the chair's discretion as to how much public forum is taken or not. In any case, to decide to prioritise business ratepayers or taxpayers. Bristol, like, I would encourage committee members to think these are going to be policy committees rather than regulatory committees. It might well be that you have expert information coming in from organisations that have never been based in Bristol or the UK for that matter. I know the SED policy massively benefited from a lot of evidence, both for and against the policy that we went with from organisations from outside the system. I think to restrict ourselves unnecessarily would be, I don't see why we do it.
All right. Lorraine.
I was just going to say, I work for a statutory body and I can't work in Bristol.
Yeah.
So because I live in Bristol, so it's a really swings and roundabouts, isn't it?
Interesting.
So I don't know what the answer to that is.
Can
But
I
if
say,
we talk,
sorry, I've talked over you.
that's right. I was just going to say, so if we were going to vote, I'm going to make this up. If we were going to vote on extending my road, and I had somebody in London saying no, you can't because I like that road the way it is, that would be right, wouldn't it? I know it's a stupid example, but do you see what I mean?
But for us councillors on the edge of the city, we're aware that sometimes proposals in our areas affect those who are outside. So actually what we're saying is anyone who's just across the border, their
Would be
opinion
disenfranchised.
we will never hear, which also really good planning. And I mean,
Yeah.
I know that some of the other councils around us have put these restrictions in place, which I think is wrong, but even their councillors wouldn't be allowed to come along and speak to us on their behalf. I don't think it's been massively abused in the past. I don't think it's a big issue to resolve.
Yeah.
All right. So it sounds like the room is against this restriction. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we don't want to restrict in that way. Should public forum questions for all committees, regulatory and policy, be limited to 2 questions with 1 supplementary per public forum question? Anyone got any points against this? Tim? Is
Yeah,
it awkward?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm the awkward squad today. I perfectly understand why the suggestion's been made, and it is difficult if you get a substantial amount of questions in, and it is trying to balance the books. I don't necessarily object to there being a limit to questions. I actually think 2 questions doesn't allow somebody to explore a point or maybe investigate an issue. It is such a limit on the West of England Combined Authority. I get around it by writing questions and submitting them in my fellow ward councillors' names with their permission. So in that sense, the limit also doesn't work because you just create random buddies to submit the questions for you. So I think if we are going to put a restriction, it should be a reasonable restriction to stop excessive questioning, not one which would stop reasonable questioning. And maybe a limit of 5 questions seems reasonable to stop excessive amounts of questions.
Okay. I've got, I'll go to Lorraine then Guy.
Just to clarify, Tim, so does that mean that, are we saying that somebody, is it about capacity for Dem Services to respond to like somebody sending in 15 questions per item?
Essentially it's...
you know, like you could end up with like somebody literally like really passionate about something specific and then asking loads of questions. And then does that mean that if they were to come to would it be the equivalent of a full committee,
if they came to
like now, like this setup, would they end up having the right to ask 10 questions?
Yeah, and it would be the chair's discretion to say yes or no, you can ask all of these. But I think the main motivation for this one in particular is that it does take quite a lot of officer resource to answer. You know, if you have 30 public questions, that would probably be quite good going, but they could become out of control if there were large meetings. So a reasonable number is what you would prefer to restrict, I think. Like, you don't want someone asking 100 questions, but what's the line? I feel like probably 2 is too low, but I also feel like for the benefit of democratic services we should have a limit, but that's just my opinion at the moment. So we've got Guy, then Helen.
I'm going to leave aside that democratic services officers are responding to questions to politicians. Just to say,
Well, they have to read them as well, don't they?
They do.
So a lot of them are like 2,000 words and then a few questions at the end.
I'm going to remember, or at least raise the spectre of planning committee meetings in the past where there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of objections, and committee meetings. The one that always jumps out at me is public safety and protection, where we make really quite sweeping policy to an empty room. I'm always genuinely surprised that people come forward. If someone wanted to come to PSP and ask a dozen questions, I think it would be welcome. I think the interest would honestly be welcome. I think this is one of those areas where it has necessarily got to be at the chair's discretion. All we're doing by setting an arbitrary limit is just saying we're not even interested in reading it if it comes in. I think whether the chair takes it or not is a matter of discretion for the chair. There will be times when we can't let people even have one in a meeting. But I do think leaving that door open so that chairs can transparently, publicly make decisions to what they want to hear or don't is actually quite a good check and balance on the power of the chair.
All right. I've got Helen, then Gary.
I don't think it's just, although it's very important, democratic services and officers being able to draft answers, but the other issue about limitations is to give more people a chance to speak. And I can remember back before these limits were put, I can remember, in fact, I think it's somebody in this room who asked me 27 questions at a meeting.
It's like 3 people it could be.
Who was it? Brown had holds a record on 29 questions.
Oh, right. So I just think this is about equity, isn't it? It is about more people being able to get in. And there'll always be that chair's discretion. So I think you're right that two is too low, but I certainly wouldn't want to have it open-ended.
Okay, so what number would you suggest, Helen? We've got to come up
Oh,
with
we
a
always
number.
like odd numbers, don't we? So it's
We'll
either
do
got to be
wisdom of
3 or
five.
5, I would say.
Okay.
Tim's suggestion of 5 seems reasonable.
All right.
I think the
I'm
point,
just looking at Taylor's face.
the point is when you put a number, I also
Thanks.
understand there's a human temptation to ask questions up to
Up
that
to
number. So
five,
I would
yeah.
say an absolute maximum of 5 questions or something.
Okay, we're going to Gary and then Guy.
But 5 seems a reasonable number. I think we ought to be careful of time spent in the meeting as well.
Yeah.
So I think the supplementaries ought to be limited to 2.
Yeah.
So that you're not spending a huge amount of time in the meeting.
Well,
By
this
the
is
way,
suggesting
it's responsibility.
one supplementary public forum, and I was going to say I think it should be 2,
Yeah.
because one is, like, if you do have a question where it's like, hang on, no, you've still not answered it, but having that second supplementary to just make the point that it hasn't been answered can be what the member of the public wants.
Yeah.
So, sorry, go on.
And basically, it's the member's responsibility, chair or whoever, to answer the question, not the officers. Now, they will very often get factual information from officers, but it's their responsibility to give the answer.
Yeah.
I think we should make that clear, actually. That's a good point, because at the moment for scrutiny, that's not the case. At the moment for scrutiny, the answers are written by officers. Although there are questions to the chair that are officers' response, which surprised me as a scrutiny chair, because when I was a cabinet member, I would quite often rewrite answers to be the answers for me. And I would use the officer's answer as the starting point. And I think the mayor does the same thing. They're perfectly reasonable. I think we should be clear that we would expect chairs to
actually answer
the answers. Yeah, obviously the officers prepare the factual element.
Guy.
I was going to try and sort of draw a nice compromise line. I don't think it's an area where the public would completely understand the point that we're trying to make. If we were to use wording like, for example, time allowing, members of the people participating in the public forum will be entitled to 2 questions and 2 supplementary questions. However, should you provide more questions than this, they are less likely to be heard. Do you know, just be really open with people, like, we'll hear what we can, but if you're silly, we're not going to hear them. But equally, I do know areas of policy where whoever takes that transport job, I will say some kind words to David Bredwell. I have very often picked up some of his points at full council where I felt like a lot of councillors may have drifted away. But he makes a lot of genuinely quite insightful points, and whoever takes on that transport committees can look forward to those interactions.
Controversially, I'm now, instead of taking a vote, I'm going to ask the public forum member. Hello, let's do it. Dan, how many do you want?
I think it's not so much.
Seriously,
I think it's not. Yeah, I think it's not so much about the limit. It's how much time people get in a public forum, and obviously there's a limit on how much time public forum can take up.
Yeah.
But people have been very frustrated at full councils when they've taken an afternoon off work, they've submitted their questions, the 15 minutes has gone up, and they've not had their questions even reached, which is incredibly frustrating. So yeah, I think this committee should be looking at it as on dividing the available time as best it can, rather than, because at some committees meetings there's not that many members of the public present.
Yeah.
I know other meetings there's huge numbers of members of the public, so yeah, I'd focus more on dividing the time up equitably.
All right then. So, shall we go?
But 5 is probably good.
Okay. Shall we vote to have 5 with 2 supplementaries maximum per question? But to Dan's point, and the equity point would be the chair will be able to say in advance. I think this is the thing, that we want to empower the chair to say something like, look, there's too many people here, so I'm going to take this question, this question, this question, and this question, and you can only have one supplementary just because I want to get through as many people as possible. And that's something that we want to be able to empower the chair to do, but we also don't want to prevent, in a meeting where hardly anyone turns up, people from just keeping on going. And I suppose it's what the framing device of the empowerment that we give in these rules and it sort of encourages. So I don't know. I am actually a bit iffy. Do you want to come in?
I think the power of public forum is in the supplementary questions. Like as a council member answering those, it's like it's a little test of your knowledge and experience if you're actually able to, as you should be able to have that back and forth in that way. So my view would be that it's 3 with 2, and then it's the chair's discretion to make sure everyone in the room who's, to your point, taken an afternoon of work has the chance to speak. And I think we can just surely be able to find a form of words that is appropriate so the chair can make that. I mean, no chair is going to be proud of the fact that someone's in the room who's taken an afternoon of work and cannot speak. No chair is going to want that from any party. Why would they preside over that? They're not going to want to. So my view is we up the supplementaries to 2, but I think the maximum questions are 3. I mean, that still gives you a huge number of questions.
Yeah, that gives 9 questions, effectively, because you get 3 and then 2 supplementaries on each. That's 9 questions.
No, we're talking about 2 supplementaries in total.
Oh, in total?
All we'll ever do is hear from Dan.
You'd have to send them all down for it.
Okay.
All right, no, that's all right.
Yeah, you choose where you ask your supplementary, obviously, or your 2 supplementaries. Okay, 3.
Okay.
Because I remember as well, going back to the beginning of this meeting, that there was something about should somebody be able to ask a question that wasn't part of their original submission. Do you remember that? Like, as in, okay, they've submitted their question,
and then they
have a question that they think, do you know what, I wish I had done that. They wouldn't get still the ability to do the follow-up with their previous question. I remember that came out, I don't know.
The Constitution states it should follow up to the question or the answer.
Well, I would just say there was one
But yeah, so that's good.
Yeah.
Politicians been
Right,
known
we need
do
to-
that trick as well.
I need to start getting us to a vote here.
I need to go.
Yes, that's okay, Nicola. So are we okay on 3 written questions with 2 supplementaries? Okay, who's in favour of that?
As long as chair's got discretion.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all down.
11. Oh, it's 10. And you win. Okay. Right, that took a while. Deadline. Should it be 12 noon, 2 working days before the meeting for public forum statements?
I'm strongly in favour of this. Firstly, there ought to be consistency across every committee of
Yes.
More to the point, capital councils, many regulatory committees have a rush of final submissions the morning before, so it's practically impossible for democratic support to actually go through these. But this way, they'd actually have it in 2 days before and a day to look at them after they came in before publishing.
I agree with Richard.
Okay. I've got Lorraine.
I was going to say Alex Taylor.
Yeah. Taylor, how do you feel? It's fine, you don't have to.
Yeah, you don't want to know how I feel.
Taylor's just like, get rid of the puppet.
Yeah.
I hate them. Okay. No. I think that no one said anything against Guy.
I agree with consistency. I'm thinking specifically of regulatory committees where it's quite possible, for example, in a licensing hearing for the police or the council or responsible authority to agree conditions in the hours, minutes sometimes, before a committee meeting. And again, if you want to put a consistent deadline on it, fine. But once again, I would say, I think it should absolutely be the chair's prerogative to allow in late statements if they want to. The danger with that, and I would defer to Tim's judgment on this, is is having a judgment made by the chair likely to potentially, when it involves a regulatory, weaken our legal position in regard to decisions, or could that happen if a chair decided to take, you know, statements on one case but not another? Is there a requirement that regulatories be consistent? Because if there is,
Then
I would say keep regulatory where they are and let policy be whatever full council is.
Just saying, I think with regulatory committees, that it's more incumbent upon us to be consistent with the way that you know, the committee has all the information before it, and not to have you know, statements provided at the 11th hour.
So you would actually disagree with your setting up statement, which is against your personal experience, I suppose.
Well, it applies to cases in particular where, for example, you might have 50 objections from members of the public and responsible authorities, only to find that the venue has agreed, that the applicant has agreed conditions with several of them, which completely changes the nature of the discussion, at which point the public are completely unable to revise their statements or change what they're asking. So what you end up with is a load of statements that speak to an application that's gone away, in fact, and you're dealing with a completely different thing. Like, I think having some sort of, I don't want to make it harder for people to have their say in meetings, I suppose is what I'm saying.
Okay.
I appreciate
Isn't that a chair's discretion?
Yeah.
exactly if it is. But
So
what
I
I wouldn't want to do
Yeah,
is
Guy's point is
caught
that
over and over
To
again.
be fair, Guy, to take your example of the licensing hearing, even if they agreed the conditions, if a relevant person is there, they can speak to it. They can actually verbally speak. They didn't have to parrot their previous statement.
As long as they can be there. But yes, I know it's true.
I'll bring in Tim.
I think there's no way to really sort Guy's situation, because he's talking about changes which can happen in a few hours or even a day before. The reality is that the current rules, people wouldn't be able to adapt to that. I believe public forum is an integral part of the council. I'm sure all councillors agree on that. It's been a long, hard fight to make sure public forum's been as maximum as possible at this council. And this council's pretty good compared to some. I went over to Cardiff recently and discovered that they have meetings with virtually no public forum allowed in them. So I was like, whoa, what the hell? How did you get away with that? And the council seemed shocked when I said, do the public not want to come along and speak to you? And they were like, no. I was thinking, so it's really good that we get so many people to our council meetings. We get a lot more than we used to do. I mean, we occasionally have the odd blow up, but on average, there's substantially more engagement. I do think the committee system will change some, hopefully shift someone out away from full council to the committees where the decisions are being made, which will be good. I think, given the amount that we now see of public statements come in, and to ensure democratic services officers can process them, to ensure we can read them as councillors and reflect on them, I actually think the 2 working day suggestion is acceptable. I wouldn't have it different for different committees, so I already get caught out myself. I get confused. So if I get confused, it seems really unfair on the public that we should have consistent rules across every count, every meeting. And the 2 working day, I think, is an acceptable alteration given that we've kept, but we've managed to make movement in other parts.
Guy, you've spoken so many times. Can I just go to a vote now? Because I think we're all in favour of this.
I think this is not going to cause a problem. It's not going to materially change it, but it might be very helpful in a particular area of full council to become a problem lady. I'd just like to politely request, because Tim, there will be an EQIA of this before it goes to full council, yes? That must be, surely.
I'll have to come back to you on that, Guy.
I was going to ask,
I thought so,
as part of an assessment around this, if we could look at the challenge of groups bringing public forum, or individuals bringing public forum that could be considered hate speech into what is a place of work for people, repetitiously, meeting after meeting. this is something that this.
So I don't think that's specifically on this point. Although
No, but I think that would have a much a different impact in the context of a local meeting.
All right.
And I think that's something we could scope.
Okay.
I would really like this dealt with in some fashion, and this might be a good way of dealing with it.
I don't think it's in this scope. I'm just going to take a vote on this bullet point, but I do heed your point, obviously. So should the deadline be for statements before all committees, regulatory and policy, be 12 noon 2 days before the meeting? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And no. And abstain. Gary, what are you doing? You didn't vote.
I was still.
Okay, thank you. Right, final one. Limit on the length of public forum statements. Yeah, I think we should set a limit, but what is it? Like, I don't want War and Peace. I'm not going to read it. Like, I don't read ones that
1,000 words.
1,000 words? I think so.
It's a limit, isn't it?
It's 2 pages.
500.
It's good. 500, that's short.
That's,
I mean,
Somewhere in the middle
I think
there.
1,000. I think 1,000 is good because it's about a page and a half, maybe 2.
2 pages.
Guy,
Some people include photos, of course.
Well,
and a
that's
picture
why I
is
said
worth
words.
1,000 words.
1,000 words and 1,000 photos.
I would
That would
honestly
be a
make
great
the case-
submission.
Sorry,
I
yeah.
would honestly make the case for no in the case of written material. I would say why, but for something like, for example, the budget or the MTFP or for the local plan, again, you may get groups, organisations in the city whose only way of feeding themselves through public forum who might wish to comment in quite a lot of detail. In terms of speaking length, I would say yes, at chair's discretion, you could have a limit. I think the limit needs to be longer than it is at the moment, but that's
Well,
my opinion.
that's not
But I will absolutely go to the death on one thing, which is that whoever the chair is responding is limited to the same amount of time to respond. Because what you should not have is a 1 minute question followed by a 20-minute answer that then times out the whole of public forum.
That's a good point.
So there needs to be limits both ways if there are to be.
Agree.
Yeah.
It's got to be
Yeah.
a relevant response.
Yeah. Okay, so, I mean, I think 1,000 words is quite short, but like then I think about it and like when there's more than 100 public statements, how many of them do I read?
It's 2 to
That's what
3
I said,
pages.
it's a lot.
And the officers have to read, and I think that the real point is that. So perhaps we could say that there might be exceptions on specialist areas like budget, and even planning. Like I've personally written a planning objection that's way longer than that, and this is a public forum statement which is completely different to a planning objection, but it is quite easy when you're into it to just like provide a whole load of evidence. And I don't, well, this is the point, I don't know whether 1,000 is
In
right.
one sense, there's a
Right.
need for a limit. Because
Yeah.
your own brain kicks
My
in.
own brain is like,
After
well,
3
I don't
pages,
want a
I'm
limit.
probably not reading any more of that
No.
statement, I'm reading to the next one.
Exactly. So,
750 is my limit.
I'll go as high as 750.
No more. Thousands a lot.
We're not haggling, are we haggling? And so,
I am
What-
aware that my officers.
let's go around, what do you think? Give me a number, no limit or 1,000 or whatever.
I've probably no limit to.
Okay.
1,000 or no limit. 2 minutes.
2 minutes. No, on the text, on the written statement.
That'd be 1,000.
1,000.
2 sides of A4.
That's
More
about.
font size you
That's
use.
about 1,000. That is about 1,000.
Exactly.
So.
But I just
right?
think that
Yeah.
that's when you're reading a
Yeah.
stack of statements,
That's manageable.
manageable.
Lorraine,
750. In the world.
Guy,
No limit text, 2 minutes speech.
I would agree with that.
no limit
With
text,
what?
and
No,
Mark.
no limit on how much you like.
1,000.
There's people.
Okay. So it looks like it's
Got Comic Sans and you don't read it.
okay. They're standardised, the format.
What was
So it looks
four?
like it's 1,000. I want to say 1,000. So what's the numbers?
So for no limit, there was 1, 2, 3, and maybe Kent with 4. And for 1,000, it was 1, 2, Holland 3, 4, 5, Francis 756. Yeah, it's more for having a
I'll
minute.
stick with 1,000. I go higher than 1,000.
All right. It's close, but we've gone with 1,000.
Wonderful.
Gosh.
You can make a point in 1,000 words.
That's everything, right? It's full council.
1,000 words.
1,000 words.
Everything but full council.
Maximum.
1,000 words maximum.
People just remove all the A's and verbs and nouns. I need to university submitted an essay on that. You hit the limit, so you just removed all the as.
Just
verbs.
removed all
And then couldn't believe it when you got failed.
You just get 6 people to write 1,000 words. That's
Exactly.
what you do.
I think that's what you do. Like, if you have more than 1,000 words to say, if you're a campaign group, you just stack them between different campaigns. Right, we are done on that. So there is one more question. Does the working group support, this is question F under 4, does the working group support the proposals for appointments and chairing of the escalation panel? So I thought this was good. I thought that basically, sorting it out with the whips, having it rotate probably, having something that fairly well echoes our current call-in procedure. It all made sense to me. Does anyone have any concerns to raise? We don't have any on this side of the room. We do have 2 on this side of the room.
Just
Gary?
one recommendation, if we have practically one part control, I would hope that the chair of the escalation panel would be somebody from a different party.
Yeah.
That'd be for them to decide.
I think it's for them to decide,
If there's
isn't it?
a party with a majority.
Then they can do that. But I
It's
mean,
a
I
recommendation,
obviously,
you can't enforce it.
I very much agree, but I don't think it's legally possible for us to enforce. Guy?
There's no point putting it in there.
This is to propose. This is to perform a largely scrutiny-based function.
That's that. Yeah.
No.
Or at least some potential for scrutiny.
It's a call, isn't it?
It's a
It's,
calling, yeah.
It's not
Well,
scrutiny.
it's a reversey decision-y body. Like,
The problem you've got, guys, scrutiny is a legal word within the...
yeah.
No.
And Tim winces when you use it, because
You
you
use it,
open up
it's
whole other
not-
acts he's trying to get away from.
Yeah, we're not calling it scrutiny. We're not calling it scrutiny. There is no scrutiny involved. I don't know what you're talking about there.
Review.
It's a review. Yeah. What's your point? Sorry.
I was going to say, if it's decided by whips to an extent, well, in fact, you're saying it's decided by full council, in which case it's decided by the majority party. If it rotates between the chairs, and with all due respect from colleagues from moderation, that would mean that Gary gets as many shots at the escalation panel as the Labour Party would under the current numbers. That strikes me as being a slightly perverse outcome either way.
Yeah.
And what I was going to suggest is the escalation panel, if it's to be politically proportionate, should at least be chaired by someone from the largest,
So we've
not
said
the
that it
largest
might.
party, but
I mean, I think that we should have it rotate by default and in order that's agreed by the whips. I think that that's a good proposal because that is just the chairing. The if there's a majority party, they would still have the majority of votes on it. And the order would be agreed at the start of the year. So if everyone doesn't want Gary to have a turn, then they'll put him at the back, and then there probably won't be 5 call-ins or escalations in a given year, so we would probably not get the opportunity. I feel like pragmatically that's what would happen, Tim.
Yeah. I think I would actually write that into a constitution that I'm sure is just more of a practical way of running. And 2, I'm absolutely fine with it, so we move to a vote.
Yeah. All right. I'll move to a vote. So people in favour of the proposals for escalation panel procedural rules?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
7. Gary's just put 7. And against? And abstain.
which I was against.
Oh,
Sorry.
that's against.
Awkward bugger in the room tonight.
I know. All morning, believe it or not, the meeting before this, I was even worse.
Oh, Guy was the most awkward. Okay. I'm a very awkward person. So
Normally I am, but
I And that's the end of the meeting. Oh, we're 1 minute over, so. Okay, thank you everyone.